It's part science, part intuition. At the Relaxahatchee River, Jesse showed me the digital checklist system, the Hydro app.
As soon as I click yes on this checklist that let's say the water is clear and I do not identify that the water is cloudy or any sense, that yes goes directly to my manager and lets them know that at this exact time, I checked that water to make sure it was safe and clear.
This technology being used at its best.
Oh yeah.
Good job.
Now our rotations, we have evolved to having our lifeguards into a more of a roving position. With the competition pool, we still maintain the chairs for the height eligibility. But here we have to have a minimum of 5 lifeguards just to run this body of water.
Wow.
And we actually have a lifeguard positioned in our catch pool over there to help our guests that are coming out of the slides at a Barracuda Tarpon Twister.
I've seen that person there. Then Jesse brought up something that most people might not think about, pool skimming.
Pool skimming is the sounds of the water being properly flowed. So with those drains, all the water has to constantly filter throughout our pool at least 3 to 4 times a day. So not only is the water continuously being pumped in, continuously flowing out, being cleansed through our sand filters, then being pumped back into the pool. It's a very long process, but it makes sure that the water stays as clear as possible.
Then Jesse taught me about the zones.
It helps maintain that their body of water is theirs to protect anybody that's in their zone. So lifeguard Brandon right now is actually scanning Red 1 zone. So Red 1 zone is here, any part of this body of water that reaches, let's say, all the way from those stairs to the bulkhead and to the side of the corner. This entire zone is his right now. To make sure that they are staying healthy and hydrated, we do have a 30-minute rotation here for all of our lifeguards, and lifeguards are not meant to bypass more than 1 hour of continuous lifeguarding. So after every hour, the lifeguards must take either a visual break or an actual break.
After Jesse's walkthrough, I met up with Matt, one of the pool technicians responsible for keeping the water clean and safe every single day. He started by showing me how they test the water across the park.
We got comp pool, lazy river, kids pool.
Each sample is dropped in a small disc and loaded into a device, and in just seconds, it gives a full readout on the pool's chemistry. And before this little machine was created, this was more of a manual model?
Yeah, we a lot of people will use tailored tests, so it involves like little different chemicals. You would fill up a container and drop them in like a certain amount, and then basically it'll calculate from there what your pH and chlorine is.
And this is the daily task?
Yeah, this is what we do at the start of every day.
Inside the control room, he fired up the valves that get the entire water park up and running.
When we have everything going, the water level will be back up. But since we're not running everything in the moment, it'll drop it down a couple inches.
Next, he showed me the daily checklist for the park.
Then we have our chemical data sheets. So basically just making sure like that our comp pool, lazy river, kids pool are all where they need to be, anywhere between 2 parts per million or 10 parts. And then pH is somewhere between 7.2 and 7.8 for a healthy pool. There you go.
Then came the backwashing and wasting process, flushing the filters to keep the water flowing freely or removing excess water from the system to keep the water levels balanced.
And then it'll start coming out in this pit. Oh. So this whole pit will fill in about 3 minutes. Really, over there? Yep.
Next, we changed out one of the strainer baskets, which helped catch large debris before it can reach the pumps.
I'll trade you that one. Thank you. Then new one goes in just like that. And we usually let those dry out. I'll clean them later this week.
Before joining the team in Northport, Matt worked as a lifeguard in Charlotte County under Trish Sturgis, our Assistant Director of Parks and Recreation.
So I've known Trish a very long time, so that definitely was one of the influences of wanting to come work at the Aquatic Center. Had me go out for an AFO course recently, which is Aquatic Facility Operator course.
Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. It's 1 p.m. We're in the city chambers, and I call the city commission special meeting to order. Commissioners present are Commissioner Duvall, Commissioner Stokes, Mayor Emmerich, Vice Mayor Langdon, and Commissioner Petro. There is a quorum present for this meeting. Also present are City Manager Fletcher, City Attorney Fuino, City Clerk Faust, Board Specialist Linder, Police Chief Garrison, and Fire Chief Titus. I'm going to call on Deputy Chief Morales to lead us in the pledge since this is Police Day. If he would, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
Thank you, sir. Looking for an approval, motion for approve the agenda. So moved.
Second.
I have a motion on the floor made by Commissioner Stokes, seconded by Vice Mayor Langdon. If nothing to that, please vote. And that passes 5-0. City Clerk, public comment?
Yes, in person I have Joseph Majorino, followed by Tim Doyle.
Joseph Majorino, 2747 Rebel Lane, Northport, Florida. I'm making a verbal public records request for the video of the incident between Jason Yarborough and myself in the third floor lobby on March 3rd between 9 and 10:30 a.m. That's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today? I guess my first question is, have you thought about changing any of the laws that I brought up in this room that I think are unfair? And then I'm going to go back to where I couldn't go last time, because there's even more news in the news. There's going to be, the government's asking for $200 billion to go fight these wars. All this money is going overseas. I asked you guys to write a letter to get a siren in town. They're spending $200 billion. Last time they spent $1 trillion, and I got a new cable company out in front of my house, and it keeps on mailing me things, getting me to try to do business with them. So someone asked for a new cable company in this town. Wasn't me, but my taxpayer money paid for it. The siren I am asking for you to ask for could be used for numerous reasons. A tornado warning, a hurricane warning, a flood warning, an air raid siren, a drone attack. How many different things? Other towns have this. I grew up in the town, every Saturday they went off. Later on in life, I lived in a town, they only ran it every couple of years because of the nuclear power plant for testing. Technology has been around since the 40s, 30s, 20s. It's not hard to do. You have all the poles in place. You put a stupid siren on it. They're spending $200 billion. You don't think we could ask for a couple bucks to do something to help our town out of that money? I mean, Greg Stubbe and Rick Scott, Donald Trump, these guys promised not to do this, but they did it. There's nothing we can change now. It's here. Trump can say all he wants that this war is over and he won. You don't kill a religious leader and walk away. I'm telling you that right now. I know history of the world. This is far from over. You live in a community that's the largest in Sarasota County. It's full of young kids. You know where those kids are going to be going? Into the military. Hope you're ready for that. I want my air raid sirens. I don't need no water pipes, nothing else, no sewer pipes. I need an air raid siren.
That's on there.
Thank you. Moving on to presentations, 260459. Presentation of the Police Operations and Data Report for the Northport Police Department prepared by the Center for Public Safety Management, LLC, CPSM, by Jared Bergowan and Police Project Manager. Mr. Fletcher, this is your item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So today we're presenting the results of an independent operational assessment of the Northport Police Department conducted by the Center of Public Safety Management, also known as CPSM. They're a firm that is a public safety consulting partner with ICMA and has completed hundreds of police operational reviews across the country using a standardized data-driven methodology. I engaged in the review and provide an objective third-party evaluation of our police department's operations, staffing, policies, and overall performance. The goal was simple: to ensure that the department is operating professionally, efficiently, and consistent with modern policing standards, and to give both the commission and the community confidence that any concerns raised publicly could be examined through facts, data, and independent analysis rather than any sort of speculation. And rather than speculate, we chose to do what responsible organizations do, which was to bring in independent experts, open the books, and let the facts speak for themselves. As a part of the review, they analyzed department data, conducted interview and focus groups, and reviewed policies and documents, and observed operations firsthand. Their assessment looked at our staffing levels, our internal processes, our supervision, training, workload, response time, and our structure. Importantly, the overall conclusion of the consultants is we have a professional organization, but we look forward to hearing their report, and it's an opportunity for the community to hear. So now I will turn it over to Mr. Gerard Borkman, who will lead us through the presentation. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Is the volume good? Can you hear me? Or?
Yes.
Good, very good. So my name is Jared Bourgoin. I am a retired police chief. I spent about 29 years in uniform, retired in 2019, and went into the consulting space after that. The Center for Public Safety Management is an organization that was started as an offshoot of the International City and County Managers Association with the intent of giving an independent third-party analysis of public safety agencies for city government. Our goal is to come into an organization. We start with a data-driven approach to patrol staffing, and then we build an agency out from there. And we evaluate it against industry best practices. So I try to give cities and departments recommendations to move them from their current state into a better state. And that ultimately is our goal. We meet organizations that are in various conditions of doing very well, not doing very well at all, and the idea is to incorporate improvement into that organization. So our team on this, our project staff, we had 4 subject matter experts that came into your city, all retired chiefs or command executive level folks from throughout the country. Our team of public safety consultants there came from all 4 corners of the country in here to Northport to help. Dr. Dov Chels and Shan Zhao are 2 data analysts based out of New Jersey that did the data analysis piece of this report. And then our senior editor, Dennis Kuba, is listed. I also have with me today Tom Wesrick, who's one of the company principals for CPSM that is here in Florida handling a few other meetings and came to join us today. So a little bit about our methodology and how we go about producing the report that we did here is we start really with two pieces. The first thing I do is, aside from the meetings we have, the kickoff meetings with the city and with the department, we give the department a document request list where we ask for a number of things, everything from policies and procedures to budget documents to personnel documents, those types of things, so that we can learn about the organization. We also start with a significant data piece. What that involves is our data people reach out, work with the city. We get a full year of CAD data, computer-aided dispatch data. We get a full year of that data so that we can get a good snapshot as to what the patrol workload looks like in the community. Beyond that, we do a number of interviews, whether it's remote or in person, with people throughout the organization. We do focus groups. So when we actually came here and did the site visit, we asked to meet selectively with groups of officers, groups of sergeants, groups with managers, groups of civilians in the agency to get a good cross-section of people in the organization to tell us not only what works well in the Northport Police Department, but what they believe from an internal perspective could be improved. Everything that we do is based upon operational and administrative observations, and the recommendations that we make are standardized across the board that kind of put agencies into that best practice operational piece. The report that you have in front of me, I assume everybody's had an opportunity to see the report that we produced. In total, it's about 180 pages long. We're not going to talk about the entire thing in this presentation. But that report includes both the analysis report, the report that was done by the SMEs, as well as the data analysis part that's part of the appendix of that report. Within there are 68 recommendations. 68 recommendations is not in any way, shape, or form an indictment of the organization, nor is it an indication that we think we found 68 things wrong with the Northport Police Department. They are 68 recommendations that, again, are believed to make small adjustments in the organization in many cases that we believe will improve things. Some of those are very, very simple things. The chief can simply say, we're going to change, we're going to do this, or can be changed with the signature of a pin, basically. But some of them require a little bit more planning, some strategic thought, as well as some capital investment. We also acknowledge that some recommendations work in some communities, but they may not work in others. I'm going to talk a little bit about accreditation and policy. We made some recommendations there, but Florida's got some unique things there that Northport PD may say that's not a good fit for us. But again, we still make them because we believe they are part of industry best practices. And then at the end of the day, the recommendations are based on data, legal consideration, best practices, and experience. So within the report, there's a lot of different parts. Part of what we do is we really look at the crime profile in the community. It kind of works through its way into the workload. But there's some charts and graphs inside that report. Hopefully that's easy enough to read. But there's some charts and graphs in the report that talks about crime in Northport, and we compare that against the state averages, against other jurisdictions within the state that might have some similarities to Northport, as well against the national averages. So the bottom three lines there, the bottom one is the national rate, the one above that is the Florida rate, above that is Northport, and then above that are several comparable cities that we had pulled out of there. The numbers that you see when we're talking about violent crime, property crime, total crimes, that is indexed per 100,000 people. So it's not the exact number, but it's an index number based upon those communities at 100,000 population. So you can see across there that Northport is doing extraordinarily well in terms of both violent and property crime and total crime. Significantly better than the state average, and even better than that against the national average. 2023, total crimes per index per capita, just over 1,000. The state average was just over 1,800. The national average was over 2,300. And then the numbers get even better when you look at 2024. We also put in there 10-year crime trends. This particular graph is just within Northport. It looks at the 10-year crime trend of both property crimes, which is the top line. You can see a little bit of a decline, a slight spike around 2017, 2018, and then a gradual decline since then. Violent crime, the bottom line, has remained relatively consistent the last 10 years in the community. Here we have a graph that looks at crime in Northport against the state of Florida. So the top line being the state of Florida over the last 10 years has seen a gradual decline or a consistent decline in overall crime. Northport has also seen that gradual decline with the exception of the up year there in 2018. But you can see the gap is getting a little bit closer between where you were in 2015 and where you are today. Still significantly better than the state average, but it is starting to shrink. We talked about staffing in the agency. A lot of people will refer to the type of work that we do as staffing studies. They're asking us, based upon our analysis of the organization, what is the right size of the organization? So what we do is we try to capture a point in time as to what staffing was. This particular chart was put together while we were doing our work in November. And you can see the total staffing within the agency. At that time in November, there were 5 vacancies in the entire organization. I'm sorry, 8 vacancies. 5 of those vacancies were held at the police officer rank. 3 of those vacancies were held within the civilian ranks of the organization. Now, when we put that number up there, it does not mean that you only had 8 less people doing total work, because there's always people in an organization that are off on long-term injuries, might be off on FMLA leave, might be off for a variety of reasons. So they may not be available from a daily deployment standpoint, but those were the official numbers that were on the books in the agency at the time of this assessment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the findings. And again, there were 68 recommendations and findings in this report. And we're only going to cover a couple of them just so you get an idea as to what and how we go about doing it. So I've got a picture up there for the Florida accreditation process. We encourage agencies in many ways to pursue accreditation. Accreditation, whether it's done at the national level or the state level, ensures that an agency is operating within the best legal industry recommended guidelines for policy practices and things like that of police operations. There are two ways that agencies can go about pursuing this. There's a national accreditation process, which is called CALIA, and then many states have developed their own accreditation process that are state-specific for those organizations. Florida has such a process, and the Northport Police Department is accredited through that Florida process. I will point out, because I was corrected by the agency, Florida has multiple tiers of accreditation. The Northport Police Department is very proud of the fact that they have attained the top tier qualification of Excelsior, quadruple. I called it Excelsior. That was my mistake that I made when I was on the site, but it is quadruple Excelsior status, signifying their commitment to the accreditation process and to operating within an area of best practices. We did make a recommendation. So currently the way Northport PD gets their policies and they assemble their policy manual is they will look at sample policies from the state. They will reach out to other agencies and compare policies and that sort of stuff. And that is a good process. There are some processes out there that, or some companies out there that will do a subscription service. And what a subscription service does for you is it not only makes sure that all policies are updated in a timely manner according to state and national standards and any legislation changes that are made, but it also has a legal review of each of those policies, as well as a built-in attestation process to ensure that everybody in the organization has received it. And then if you'd like, it also tests your workforce against that policy. Now, Northport does a lot of those things already. They have their process in place for attestation. They have their process in place for making sure that policy gets out to everybody. We still make the recommendation that they will at least evaluate the subscription service. And if they elect not to go with the subscription service, primarily for the legal review part, that they build in a legal review process to each of their policies. At the end of the day, anything that gets litigated, your policy manual is going to come into that. It's going to be part of that discussion. The folks that are going to do the legal representation for the city want to be comfortable with the policy language. And so we encourage at minimum a policy review from a legal standpoint. The subscription services will do that for you. We also talk in the report about doing a succession plan. A succession plan is not to identify that a certain command level person or a captain is slated to potentially be the next police chief. A succession plan is how do you develop your organization at every rank along the way for improvement and preparation to take the next level. Now, when we talk to Northport about this, they have pretty strong informal succession plan pieces in place. They've got their training that they want to make sure their command level people get to. They have their supervisor development. They have multiple stages along the way that would be defined as succession planning. What we encourage the agency to do is let's put that on paper. Let's have a defined plan so everybody in the organization understands what that is and how to go about doing that. We also learned when we were on site that Northport PD and the city have already invested in an executive coaching service to help the department improve. We put in there some encouragement to have that executive coaching move down into the supervisory ranks of the organization. When we were on site, it is our understanding that that was already part of the plan, but that was part of our recommendation as well. The internal affairs function, this was an area that we were asked, sorry about that. This is an area that we were asked to take a special look at. So within the IA process, we did make a recommendations to adopt a software platform that would provide efficiency and standardization across the IA process. So that's built into it. We also encourage the agency to develop a policy or procedure that would outline what an early intervention program is. So what those steps are along the way, that if you do see certain behaviors taking place within your workforce or within certain people, that you would be able to put into place early intervention procedures. We encourage the agency to go down that direction. We also encouraged, based upon some experiences that Northport would have, is to develop a partnership or a meeting type thing that would bring folks from HR risk and the city attorney's office with the department to talk about ongoing litigation, to talk about how to prevent that, and then more specifically to talk about existing investigations that were being discussed within the organization to make sure that everybody was on the same page going forward in terms of what the ultimate outcome of those might be. Then we also made an encouragement for the organization to combine the internal affairs and training division. That is not a recommendation that we make for every agency. That was specific to the observations that our subject matter expert on that particular part of the project had made. Now, there is a commonality between the internal affairs function and the training function. At the end of the day, when you see failures within an organization, when you see problematic behavior take place in an organization, there is a nexus to training, and there is a nexus to changing organizational behavior through training. And so there is a fit for those two things to often come together. We encourage the agency to look at combining those into a single division. And then, from a training standpoint, this goes hand in hand with a succession plan, is for the department to publish an actual master training plan. So again, at every position along the way, steps that you want to see that involve professional development of your individuals based upon their rank and based upon their assignment in the organization. Excuse me. So let's get into the data piece, because that's the core of the report. When we build a report for an organization, we start with the patrol piece, because patrol is considered the foundation of modern day policing in virtually every police department in every community in this country. So in the report that you have are going to be a series of tables and graphs and a lot of data that really outlines what is happening in terms of police and crime activity calls for service within the community. I put a couple charts in there just to give you an example as to what you're seeing. But the first chart that you see in this presentation is patrol total workload. These are events that come into the department's CAD system or into the dispatch center, and it really gives you an idea as to what activity and how it originates within the community. So you see here, shaded in orange, those are the community-initiated calls that come into dispatch that are handled by Northport police officers. So just under 40% of all activity in the CAD system come in as a result of calls from the public. And then the green there, the larger one, that is police-initiated activity. So that's anything that an officer calls out on, a traffic stop, a subject check, an extra patrol, whatever that might be that an officer initiates into the CAD system, and that's just under 55%. You'll see the light green slice there, which is just under 6%. We call it zero on scene. That confuses a lot of people when they see that in a report, so I want to give a quick explanation as to what that is. Zero on scene does not mean that it was not work. What zero on scene means is that there was activity within the CAD system that took up such a small amount of time, typically less than 30 seconds each incident, that it simply was excluded from the time analysis later on in the report because it would skew numbers. A good example is this, and this happens in every police department, so I want to explain what it is, because it doesn't imply that anything is going wrong. It happens in a couple of different ways. Let's say you have an officer who has an expectation that they are to log certain extra patrols into CAD. So their supervisor says, hey, we've got a thing, we need to extra patrol a certain park in town, for instance. So an officer, while they're out there on patrol, may go around and may be extra patrolling that park, and then at the very end, they'll tell dispatch, hey, just log me on an extra patrol at that park and then put me back into service. It documents it in the system, so the department knows that it happened, so the community knows that it happened, but it doesn't necessarily signify how much time was spent on that call. So just so we don't skew the total amount of extra patrols later on in the analysis, we'll exclude those. The other area where it's very common is an officer may see a call sitting on the screen that needs attention, but they haven't been dispatched to it. Maybe they've even been dispatched to another call, but they see that, hey, there's a check the area because there's loud music that's been reported in the area. So an officer's driving through, maybe on their way to another call, they roll their windows down, they look around, there's no more music, the complaint is gone. Maybe they just tell dispatch, hey, that call on the screen, clear that off, I've checked it, it's no longer there. So again, what a dispatcher does is they very quickly log, it was handled by Officer Smith, and they put Officer Smith immediately back into service. It doesn't capture the total time that they were on the call, so we exclude those. That's all that means. In the case of Northport, there were almost 4,000 incidents within that years of CAD data that were classified as that. So now we look at the percentage of what drives activity within Northport. Each of those pieces of the pie represent individual types of calls, whether it's alarm, assist calls, crime calls, disturbance calls, and so forth. Within Northport, the single largest thing that we see are traffic-related matters. That's 32% of all activity recorded by Northport police officers. Those can be traffic accidents that were called into dispatch. They could be traffic stops and traffic enforcement being done by Northport police officers. And then the second largest one, 21%, were generally classified as public service type calls in the way that Northport does CAD stuff. But if you take some of the more serious things like crime calls, for instance, that's shaded in, that's about 7% roughly of all the calls that Northport PD deals with. And then we talk about response times, because response times get factored into the service that's being delivered to a community. I have two tables to show you here. One is the average response time to all the various zones within the city. So Northport's divided into zones A through H, and the average response time is the fourth line over from the left within each of those zones. Now you can see that the zones here are not evenly sized by any means. Zone H and Zone C are 36 and 24 square miles. They're very, very large. That goes all the way down to 5 square miles for zones E and F. So the city has divided, or the department has divided up zones of the city based upon workload, based upon a way that makes sense for them. And then we see the average response time within each of those areas. Now that's not a response time based upon priority. That's a response time based upon all calls. So you could very well have a very low priority call of somebody that just needs an officer to take a report, and if the agency is busy, maybe that report's going to wait for half an hour, 45 minutes, or even a couple of hours in some cases, depending on how busy they are. That's an average of all calls that happened within those particular zones throughout the course of the year. The second one is the slightly more important one that we look at. This looks at response times based upon priority. Now, what we aim for is that for the highest priority calls, those things that demand, let's say, a lights and siren response, a threat to life, an in-progress property crime that is very, very significant, for instance, we want to see response times that can potentially be closer to 5 minutes. Now, based upon Northport's response profile, we would look to see that priorities 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that those priorities would indicate that priority 1 would be the most important and works its way down. And we see evidence of that within the response time, the total response time. So for instance, for priority 1 response, they're looking about a 10-minute average. And then it's about 11 minutes for priority 2, 13 minutes for 3s, and then down into 17 minutes plus for 4 and 5. We believe that in all likelihood, you could probably create either a higher emergency response priority above that would just isolate threats to life, that would show a truer response to how fast you can get to those types of calls, meaning that within the overall priority 1 category, you've probably got some calls in there that's diluting the overall response. Something that a lot of agencies do, and I don't remember from memory if Northport does this or not, but for instance, burglary alarms. Many, many agencies will put burglary alarms up in the highest priority because of an assumption that that's an in-progress alarm. But we also know based upon data that 90+% of burglary alarms, in fact, turn out to be false because of user error, potentially faulty alarms. So many agencies have chosen to take burglary alarms and move them out of the higher priority and just ensure that shootings and stabbings and in-progress robberies and things like that get up into the highest priority to show what their true response time is to those emergencies. So we have some recommendations in the agency to make some of those adjustments. And then finally, this is the heart of what a CPSM report does. When you look at patrol staffing, there's a couple different ways that the industry has traditionally looked at patrol staffing. One of the most common being is agencies want to compare themselves to other communities based upon population and size of the agency and try to line those up. Or better yet said is an officer per 1,000 or per 100,000 profile based upon population. But we know that policing is different in communities across the board. Agencies of similar size or cities of similar size may have completely different crime profiles. One could be significantly busier than the other based upon their crime profile. We know that geography plays a large role in that. We know that demographics and city infrastructure and things like that all change communities. So we don't encourage a comparable population-based staffing piece. What we do encourage is you do a workload-based thing. So you look at what the actual workload is within that patrol structure and staff accordingly. And we do a thing called the Rule of 60. And I want to kind of explain that because you're going to see evidence of that in the report, and I kind of want to explain to you how it works so that as you read through it, you understand it. So the Rule of 60 ultimately has 2 parts. One says that we want to see that within the sworn workforce of an organization, that you have at least 60% of the sworn people in that organization dedicated to the patrol function. In the case of Northport, that number was 44%. It was 69 of the 158 sworn personnel. Now, there's a little bit of wiggle room in there because Northport PD does have some uniform assets that aren't specifically assigned to patrol, but might be working out in a marked police car in uniform that would give that perception. But the actual people that were designated with a patrol function, whether it's an officer, a sergeant, or a commander, was 44% of the organization. So you're a little bit below that 60% threshold. The second piece is, of those people that are assigned to the patrol workload, we don't want to see their regular workload, all of their work, whether it's proactive, reactive, or administrative in nature, we don't want to see that workload regularly exceeding 60%. And that's not to say that we want officers to have 40% of their time with nothing to do. What it is based upon an academic study of officer behavior and workload that takes place in a community that says there's kind of a 60% saturation piece. And so as officers are busy throughout the course of their day, when their workload starts to regularly exceed 60%, they start to shut down that self-initiated part. They start to shut down that piece that says, I've got to be out there making traffic stops. I've got to be out there proactively addressing things that the city and what administration wants us to be addressing in a proactive manner. It also starts to impact your ability to have that emergency response available at all times during the day to respond to wherever that emergency might be. And the mindset is not that it's not there. The mindset of an officer is that once you start to exceed that saturation index, they will stop doing that because they know the next call is waiting for me, the next call is coming in, and I don't want to create more work for my beat partners by not being there to cover my beat. So it's really a psychology thing that we see in the behavior of police officers. So when you start to see graphs and charts in there like this, you're going to see this is just a snapshot in time of what the summer weekend workload profile looked like within the Northport Police Department. So you'll see the top line there. That's the average number of officers deployed throughout the course of the day on the average summer weekend when we evaluated this. So you can see the number was kind of sitting at 12 around midnight, dropped down to about 11 through the middle part of the day, and then went back up to 12. The one spike you see there after 5 p.m., that's simply a shift overlap where there were multiple units from different shifts that came in and overlapped for a very short period of time in the CAD system. But you'll see that's the average number of people that are deployed. Now go to the bottom, you'll see the orange chart there. That is, on average, of those 11 or 12 people that might have been deployed out in the field, the bottom line represents how many of those would have actually been busy on a community-initiated call at that time. So I always like to take 11 o'clock as an example. So at 11 o'clock, you were sitting at about 11 officers roughly, and about 3.5 to 4 of them on average, I'm sorry, actually about 4 of them on average were occupied with an actual 911 call of sort, sitting on one of those. And then each of the other categories, whether it's proactive or administrative time, are represented. And then the green demonstrates the number of people that were actually available to respond to calls. Translate that into the rule of 60, you're going to see these graphs. So this again is summer weekends. Average deployment throughout the course of the day was 11.7 officers per hour of the day. The top line is total workload. So that is both officer-initiated work as well as the proactive work and everything that was taking place. So you can see on that green line that you see between 1 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you see a spike where it goes over 60%. Everything else along the way is staying below that 60% line. Now, I will point out that we did see some problematic things within the data of the Northport Police Department, not uncommon in the industry, and it has to do with what data is not being captured. So police agencies, based upon culture, are notorious for not always being good at capturing the report writing time in CAD, not always being good at capturing some of their administrative work in CAD. They're very, very good at knowing how long they've been on calls. They're very, very good at knowing how long traffic stops last and things like that as long as they're logging it. But we know that there's some work that doesn't necessarily get captured. But we see on there that the average workload takes up 5.4 officers of those 11.7 per hour. The average saturation index is 46%, but what is concerning is around 2 o'clock, that average or that peak saturation index approaches 70 percentile. And we saw similar profiles like that against weekends and weekends, as well as summer and winter time periods. So as a result of that, we did encourage the agency to take steps to accurately capture all workload, including the administrative and report writing time that I talked about. We also encouraged the agency to really tighten up their dispatch priority system in the way that I explained earlier, to make sure that higher priority calls get that status within the system. We do make a recommendation that there are 4 additional FTE officers added to the mid-shift of Northport PD Patrol. We also made some observations. There was some conflicting information that we had from the organization, and we just asked the agency to do some clarification that sergeants and commanders know when they can cancel a call. So it is not uncommon for a dispatch center to literally take every single call for service that comes into that center, regardless of what the nature of it is. And some of those calls simply don't require a police response or shouldn't be occupied within a police CAD system. Within the existing structure of Northport PD, we got conflicting information from sergeants and commanders at where their authority existed to be able to see that call on the screen and tell dispatch to cancel that call. So we asked the agency to clarify that line of authority so they knew when they could do that. And then there is an existing CSO program within the Northport PD. The position exists. CSOs can be a tremendous force multiplier that can be deployed to take some of the priority calls that don't require a sworn officer off of the workload of those sworn officers. The nice thing about CSOs is that there's no limit of a 60% workload. There's nothing like that exists with them. You can keep them as busy as you can possibly keep them to make sure that the sworn workforce is there to do the things that you want sworn officers to do. So we encourage the agency to re-implement that program and beef it back up. Finally, I put in there a comparable table. CPSM has done hundreds of studies. I think we're up 450, 500 across the country of public safety agencies, and we can take that body of data. We are very, very specific in the way that we collect data. We want things to be very standardized. So in the way that we've presented data in front of you may not be the way that Northport PD normally collects data and might present it to you. And we're very, very deliberate that what we do is we collect it in a very unified approach so that we can do these types of comparables. So you can see some of the things on there. Out of all the projects we've done, your officer rate, so the number of officers that you have as a ratio to your population, is a little lower than we see across the board, the industry standard. Your call for service rate, though, is also a little lower than other cities do. You get down to some other areas there, like your primary unit service time on community-initiated calls. So when somebody calls 911, how long does the average Northport officer spend on that call? In Northport, it's 42 minutes per call. The median across the board is about 30 minutes across the country. So Northport PD officers are spending a little bit more time. That's not necessarily indicative that they're wasting time. It's not indicative that they're not providing or that they're wasting time. But what it is, it's a metric that management can look at and say, well, if we're spending more time, why? Are we being as efficient as we are? Are they doing extra work that we are asking our officers to do? Or can we become more efficient in the way that we're doing that so that we can have officers back into the field quickly? So anyway, there's a number of units there, a number of metrics there that the city and the department can ultimately look at to say, these are some areas that maybe we should look to move closer into the median or closer into the average on areas that you might be an outlier at. That is my presentation. I am more than happy to take any questions you might have.
Very nice, very informative. Commissioners, any questions, comments? Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sir, you had mentioned a recommendation for automating internal affairs. Rough idea of the cost of that type of a package?
I do not know the price offhand. I don't know, Chief, have you guys evaluated that? Do you have any?
We actually have that in our current system.
The automation piece?
Yes.
Okay.
So done. Okay. Patrol workload, how do we compare? I think you showed some, could you bring that slide back up? where you compared us to other,
Yep. So workload percentages, where do you compare? So you'll see about a little over halfway down, you see workload percentages. And there's both summer weekdays, summer weekends, winter weekends. So you were higher in all four categories in terms of overall workload percentage than what we normally see in an agency.
in your opinion, our response times don't seem to be quite as good as some other communities. We've been sensitive to the fact that Northport is crisscrossed by bodies of water,
Yep.
canals, and ditches.
Yep.
What's your sense of how much that plays into our response times? I know our fire and rescue have the exact same challenge.
Yep, so that was highlighted to us. I specifically did the patrol piece of this, this report. And I remember sitting in a patrol car with an officer, and I think we were sitting basically right about here. And my directions might be a little messed up, but he mentioned that, he showed me on the map that you could go just a little bit west. And there was a neighborhood just on the other side of a canal, just a little west of here, that he says, in order for me to get there, even though it's a straight line and it may be less than a quarter mile or a half a mile away, for me to get there, he had to go all the way around to find a bridge system. And it could be a 10 or 15 minute response to something that if there was a straight line would only take a couple of minutes. So that was highlighted. We noted that in our report, that the geography of this city gives you some challenges, and geographically you're very large. I commented on a couple of those zones that you patrol. Those are very, very large zones that within a lot of cities, that might be 3 or 4 beats in and of itself. But because it's a little bit more remote, because the population's a little bit more sparse in those areas, or because it's where development is pushing out, right now it exists as one zone and you may only have one officer covering it. So it is a challenge.
I also had a question about the zones since it came up. Do we base those, and this might be for our own police force, are we primarily based on population? How do we determine the size of those zones?
Todd Garrison, Chief of Police. It's based off of workload and population.
Population,
Yep.
okay. Thank you for that. And I have one last question. In one of your slides, you said that 21% of our calls were public response or community initiated.
Yep.
Can you characterize what those are?
Yes. So within the overall report, in the data piece of the report, so I'm going to direct you towards, so I'm scrolling. So on page 175 and 174 is an appendix of call type classification. And public service calls came into 3 particular categories that were in the CAD system. And they were specifically called public service homeless, public service school. Chief, I don't know if you have a greater definition as to what they might have been. But that was simply the way they were classified in the CAD system. So we grouped them into that category.
Okay, and I lied, I have one last question, if I can find it. Oh, that crime spike in 2018, I'm just curious, do we know what caused that?
I missed the question, ma'am.
We noted a crime spike in Northport in 2018. Any ideas on what caused that?
Well, I will attribute the decrease from 2018 on to my arrival. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure.
Good answer.
But not what caused it,
Correct.
okay.
I arrived here mid of 2018.
Commissioner, Deputy Chief Morales, in 2018, what can really quickly come to mind, and I'll have to do a little more research, but that was the turnaround and the rise of construction was starting to come back. West Villages was starting to boom again, so we were having a lot of, what really drives that is larceny thefts, construction. So when you see construction start to rise, we start to see that kind of teeter up. So I'm guarantee if we did that research, we'd probably see a lot of that. It's going to do a larceny increase.
Great, thank you
Yep.
for that. I'm all set, Mayor. Great report.
Commissioner Stokes?
Thank you very much. It was very informative. Just a couple easy questions, I think. Do we presently do a legal review on any PD policies? is that something our personnel department does, our legal department, do? Or?
So currently, it's not part of our process, but the policies that we are getting are from the accreditation. So it's best practices within Florida. It is stuff that we've talked about bringing our police legal advisor into that process. So it's something that's in the works.
Gotcha. And if we were to do a succession plan, is that typically done internally by our own team, or is it farmed out and subbed to a professional organization?
No, in my experience, a succession plan is simply the organization putting out a document that says this is what we want people to have. So for everybody that we promote to the rank of sergeant, for instance, within 1 year, we want them to go to a basic supervisory school. And then based upon the time and how long they're in that position, these are the additional professional development things that we would encourage sergeants to get. Same thing for management ranks and so on and so forth. It's just, even though Northport's doing it right now, we've just said, let's put it down on paper so that everybody in the organization sees what their career track looks like.
And what would be the cost? One of the recommendations was for FTE officers to patrol mid-shift. What are we looking at as a rough ballpark number for those 4, inclusive of benefits, taxes, all fully loaded? What are we talking about a year?
Well, your recommendation is 4, but they're AB shifts, so that's 4 of 8.
It could be 8, yeah, it's 4, no, it was 2 per, I believe.
Okay.
It was 2 per,
Right.
yeah. So 4 total.
Roughly for a 4-officer startup, Commissioner, it'll be approximately right around about 200, with vehicles and all in, around 250, 260,000 per officer. And that's the startup, and then reoccurring after that is approximately, starting officer is about 115,000 reoccurring.
That's for guns, cars, radios, all that stuff.
So initial startup's about 250, 260. Yep.
All right. And the final question I had is, any thoughts on why the amount of time we spend on both police-initiated and community-initiated calls, why do we know why we're spending more time? Is it easy to identify?
We pride ourselves in the service that we give to our community. So a lot of times our officers will go that extra step, that extra mile to help our citizens.
I figured. Cool. That's all I have. Thanks, Mayor.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Petro.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, very informative. Couple questions I had, and that were answered by prior, but the crime rate spike, I had one of those questions. Question, and your recommendations, do you capture the feedback from the police department and how it's going to be taken and implemented? And is there any evaluation afterwards of those recommendations that you're making? You said about 68 recommendations.
So as part of our process, so we produce our report, we give the agency and the city a draft report, and we have a follow-up discussion about what the content of that is and where the adjustments. Nothing that we recommend is binding. These are simply recommendations. Just as I talked about, we would encourage the agency to evaluate the policy subscription service. We're not saying to do it. We're saying to evaluate it, make a determination as to whether this is a better fit for our organization based upon the way we're doing things, or if we should stay with the way we're doing it, right? So nothing even says that all of them are actually going to hap them. We did have a discussion with the agency about whether or not it was a fit and stuff like that. I don't remember if we took any out of this report as a result of that discussion. We may or may not have. But ultimately, it is up to the agency and to the city to talk about what is a fit for your organization and what's affordable.
Okay, yeah, I was just concerned about the feedback and how to proceed from your recommendations on going forward.
Can I interject, Commissioner? So a lot of these recommendations we have either already implemented or in the process of implementing. The city manager and I have had a lot of conversations about this. Some of the stuff that was recommended was stuff that was already in the works or stuff that was precluded because we couldn't afford it at the time. So the majority of these recommendations we are welcoming and we're working through those, so.
Question regarding response times averaged by zone on the slide 13th, I believe. And my question is, do we take into consideration the unique geographical landscape of our city that is a canal system, and that do we zone those in response or in relation to those canals? For example, so the officer that sits in the car and saying, it takes me 5 minutes, but because of the canal, I have to go and spend 15 minutes. Do we take into consideration when we design these zones, A through H, the canal system of our city?
So we do look at the main thoroughfares when we design the zones. However, when you have 8 zones and an entire, 104 square miles of canals and bridges and very poor thoroughfare, it's very hard to design your zones around that.
Do you foresee any changes in designing zones or adding zones or simplifying
We
zones?
want to add zones, but I need cops to put people in those zones. I can create all the zones I want, but if I don't have cops to put in those zones, then they're useless for me.
Thank you. One question about clarification: when sergeants and shift commanders can cancel unnecessary calls, what policy do you guys go off of that? So then the question is legality of, like, if somebody canceled the call and it was not really supposed to be canceled, how do you assess that?
But I'll just say that was a miscommunication, and that's been rectified between the commanders and sergeants, and everybody in the organization is crystal clear of when they can and cannot cancel a call.
Okay. And the training, there was mentioning that the recommendation was to develop a department training master plan. We don't have it, or was it in the process as far as the?
Yeah. So again, the training plan that we mentioned is very similar to the succession plan. So it is simply a rank by rank, assignment by assignment plan. So I like to use these. I spent a lot of my career in traffic, so I like to use traffic as an example. If we had a new officer coming into a traffic unit, we knew that if they were going to go to motors, for instance, they were going to get motor school right away. And then, at least in the state that I worked in, there were a series of, basic, intermediate, and advanced, all the way up to reconstruction level accident investigation courses. So we timed that out based upon an officer's time and assignment as to whether or not they were going to get that training and so on and so forth. It gave us a training master plan that somebody realized that if I go to that assignment, within 1 year I'm going to get this, within 4 years I should be at this level, so on and so forth. And you can do that for everything along the way. You get new detectives that go from patrol to investigations, so you want to get them through basic investigation courses first. Then maybe you want to specialize with some interview and interrogation courses. Then maybe you want to get them into a major crimes course based upon that level or where their assignment's going to be. So all we're asking the agency is to actually put that to paper so that it's clearly defined and everybody understands what needs to be done.
And those 2 recommendations are actually currently in our workflow. So we're building those, and we'll be implementing that. So we've taken both those suggestions, and we're working on that.
And the last, I just want to comment that from reading the executive summary, I'm happy to see all recommendations that pertain to establishing a regional cooperation between jurisdictions, local partnerships. Specifically, I can refer to crisis negotiation team and other law enforcement agencies such as sharing or UAV team. I know that PD has it, but a lot of the calls that, medical calls, they're not necessarily needed to have a UAV team. But I was very surprised and very pleasantly surprised that, making the most efficient use of our resources across jurisdiction was one of your recommendations to share with them.
And I should point out too, we talk about some regional collaborations in the report, and I know firsthand from talking to Chief Garrison and Chief Staff or from the command staff here, that that's not just the department saying, hey, we want to regionalize, let's work with our partners in a different way. It takes everybody at the table a willingness to also be part of that process. So that's not just a Northport thing. There may be roadblocks to doing that, be it from the sheriff's office or from other neighboring agencies. We simply, from our standpoint, we encourage that regionalization and collaboration to the greatest extent possible to level out that financial commitment to, entities throughout the region. It's just a more efficient way to deliver certain types of things that are, maybe low usage but high risk type things where regionalization can benefit. And I know I've had discussions with them, and I've heard some of the frustrations here in Northport about our partners aren't necessarily willing to go down that road. So,
Yeah, it's just, in today's economy, it's slowly but surely people recognize that, the collaboration with regional partners is essential and actually beneficial. It's nice to have our own, but it's, sharing is very important, whether the resources or informational or even things like, crisis negotiation team. That doesn't happen too often, those extraordinary situations, but it happens. So, thank you for the presentation. I'm really well informed.
Is that it? Commissioner Duval.
Thank you, Mayor. That was a very nice presentation, but I found the background material, those 106, that's a lot of pages, but I found that just invaluable. Looking forward for our budgetary process, for my one-on-one discussions with the city manager, for answering some of the problems that I saw on all those pages. Like the problem we have of transporting some of our patrol cars up to be, even as a city commissioner, I have spare time, I have a CDL, maybe I could volunteer to move some of those back and forth to where they have to go. But it's the idea of looking at all of these different suggestions and problems and seeing how they're going to fit in our budgetary process. Like, there's a suggestion that we have AEDs in each patrol car, rifles in each patrol car. That all costs money, and my question on that is, like as far as AEDs and patrol cars, how many communities actually can afford or actually have that? So, that's going to go into that budgetary process. So it's looking at all those things to the future. I mean, this, for me, this is, background information to look and see, keep an idea of where we're going. And like the one concerning thing to me was the rule of 60. We're below on that. And we do have, I believe, 4 or 5 unfilled positions. And everybody, I had a gentleman in my office just yesterday, complaining about speeding. If we could, again, it all comes together, how much can we afford? But in the budget, boy, if we could really get a full complement of the officers we should have. That's about all I got for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the only question I had was on the rule of 60 as well. And with those 4 or 5 positions that we have open, if they were to be filled, would that bring the complement up to close to the 60% that we were looking for?
when I do the calculations, it's normally an assumption that all positions are filled. So I took into account the vacancies that were there and made the recommendation for about that.
Okay, so that filling those positions, we would still need 4 on top of that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, a next question is, does that mean that we are possibly top-heavy in admin compared to patrol officers, or are we comfortable in admin and we just need the patrol officers?
The recommendations are just at the patrol level. We did not make observations that you were top-heavy at the management ranks. Now, every department's a little bit different. You may compare yourself to another agency of 150, 170 officers and say, well, they've only got, they've got 3 fewer managers than we have. That's all department specific in how you're structuring it. We look for efficiency to be built into the system, and we didn't see, based upon that the agency was top heavy. We didn't see people wearing, bars, so to speak, on their collars that didn't have enough work to do.
No, and that's understandable. That's what I wanted to get out there, was to make sure that we are a whole department, and if we are short on officers, then that's where we need to look at.
Yeah, the recommendations we make are at the officer ranks, yes.
Thank you very much. That's all I had. Anything else from the commissioners? City clerk, public comment? And thank you very much, very informative.
Cheryl Cook. I want to express my strong relief that HB 945 did not pass. While I understand and respect the importance of public safety, this proposal raised serious concerns about the balance between security and individual rights. The idea of creating a state-level intelligence unit with broad authority to monitor threats, including insider activity, foreign influence, and potential adversaries, may sound reasonable on the surface, but it also opens the door to unintended consequences. In particular, the lack of clearly defined guardrails and oversight mechanisms is troubling. Programs like this, even if well-intentioned, can evolve into systems that monitor lawful behavior, including political views and personal associations. History has shown that intelligence efforts without strong transparency and accountability can drift into areas that infringe on the First Amendment protections. Florida's strength comes not just from its safety, but from its commitment to civil liberties and open expression. Any effort to enhance security should be carefully designed to protect both. I'm grateful that this proposal did not move forward, and I encourage vigilance by the City of Northport to ensure that future legislation preserves the balance between protecting our communities and protecting our rights. In person, I have Tim Doyle.
A few comments on the presentation. They mentioned internal affairs and training. How I took how they were talking was they were combining those two departments. I leave it up to the chief to make the decision, but in my life, if you have someone who you're disciplining and you're trying to train them, and if the same person's doing the disciplining and training, there's going to be an adversarial relationship. So I do believe in the training, but I would keep it separate. Internal affairs takes care of the discipline part, the training people take care of the training part. That's my 2 cents on that. The time on the call. If you look at all your statistics shows you that your crime rate's down and your things are down. Maybe the time the police officers are spending with the people are serving a good purpose and bringing that crime rate down by the words they're using and by the time they're spending on the issues. So sometimes you're looking at the time, but I don't know if that time, if it solves a problem, then it's worth every penny of it, isn't it? Especially if it doesn't come back. So I don't know what the right timing is, and for all of us to sit here, if you're not sitting there at every situation, to say that it should be 10 minutes or an hour, I think is wrong. Succession plan. I'm going to say something I said the other day. I hope all the departments in this city are looking at their staffing and know how many they could lose if they start to pull the draft or they call up the people. That's also succession planning, knowing how many people you could lose to the military because of these wars. The subscription plan, legal. You've heard me talk about subscription plans or reoccurring plans. I don't like those. I think they're a ripoff. We pay a lawyer to go over all our paperwork in this city, don't we? So if we have policies in the city for each department, they should already be reviewed by a lawyer to see if they meet everything. At least in the private sector, when we put a book together of our policies and what we were doing, and again, how often do you have to change your policies? You shouldn't have to change them that often, or you need a subscription plan. So those are the few things. Thank you.
That's on there.
And final public comment.
Tim Doyle
Thank you.
and Joseph Majorino after him.
All right. I want to go back to the last meeting. I think Mr. Fletcher and everybody in the city worked real hard. I think that there's a disconnect between the people of this country and the politicians and the employees. The people want to vote to get rid of the property taxes. They don't think it's fair. And what I heard in this room last week, or whenever it was you're just going to circumvent it and move it to the bottom. That's wrong. People want a fairer tax. And that's what I mean. I think that's the whole property issue here. It's not whether we need a police department, what we have to pay them, or this department or that department. It's how we fund some of this stuff. And the property taxes really do put an unfair burden on certain people. I mean, we got a problem all over the city right now. People are ripping people off at every business. You know how? With those little pennies they're not giving back. One place I went to, well, we give it to charity. Since when does a business get to take your change and give it to charity? So I think you need to look at other taxes. There's a 7% sales tax in this state. Maybe we put a 3% tax, make it 10. Or you put a sales tax to go up. So anything that's like 36, it goes up to 40. If it's 38, it goes up to 40. So the business owners aren't ripping people off and doing anything they want with those pennies, and we know it's coming to the government. I don't know if any of this stuff's legal or if you can do it, but those are the type of things I think people want you to look at. Not just circumvent what the people want to vote in and you guys switch it back. We have a lot of people that come into town, use things, buy things, and they leave. That's everybody. Everybody on the spectrum. And you guys talk about people can spend major money on houses and people can spend little money on the houses. That's the same way you go into the store. People with a lot of money, they can spend a little more, they'll pay a little more in taxes. But to go after people and take their little houses away from them, like you were talking about in the last meeting, that just irks me, man. That's why people don't want property taxes. They miss a bill to you one time, you own their house. Someone dies and the kid finds out they owe the town 200 grand and they get the house and not the family. That's what you guys do around here, whether you know it or not. And it's disgusting. I'll see you tonight.
Joseph Majorino, 2747 Rebel Lane. I'm going to go back to the permitting again. This is a problem. The only thing that was missing from the other meeting was a cheerleading session. Bunch of girls going, Jerome, Jerome, yeah, yeah. They were giving each other high fives there. Everything's great. The permit he sold me, because in essence, he is every employee. That's the bottom line here. He sold me a permit that if you go to Port Charlotte, they tell you, do you have an engineer's drawing? No, we can't sell you the permit, yet he sold it to me. A week later, after it was issued, then I had a meeting, and then I was told, well, you know, it's state law to have the thing. He should have never sold the first permit. Now, if I didn't have the money or had no plans of doing this or was here for some other kind of reason, not just to work on my home, it'd be a different story, you know, but no. It's in the process. So at very best, I'm a month behind. At very worst, if I didn't have the money, he took $257 from me that he shouldn't have. Other thing is, you got rid of the sacrificial lamb, Geppetto's still sitting there. Like a cancer, everything has to be taken out because it just continues. From Jason to, I don't know who the guy was during the meeting, sitting next to me, didn't say a word, didn't say his name, Either he was there to protect him from me, like I'm gonna attack him, or he was there to intimidate me. It just continues. When you talk about human touch with the people downstairs, you need to have a meeting with all the employees, not you guys, it's not you. He needs to have a meeting because he's in over his head. He's not in control of the employees. They do what they want. They say what they want. And it almost came to a physical altercation with Jason, with me, with him following me. It's wrong. And it needs to stop. Residents should not be subject to this. I am not a political partner here or something. If I need help, then I surround myself with good people or I leave. Bottom line. That's the bottom line here. Have a good day.
Thank you. It's 2:11 and I adjourn this meeting.